And what we'll do this morning by way of starting is I'll have an opening statement. Senator Crapo, the senior member on the Republican side, will make an opening statement. And then my understanding is we'll have David Reed and Lori Tapazada, right? Introduced by our colleagues, okay? Over a decade ago, the Senate Finance Committee, on a bipartisan basis, felt it was important to take bold action with respect to how... Not on? How's that? Can you hear back in there?
No, sir.
How about now? Mine's on. How's this? Great. There's a wonderful story from Gray Panther days. You know, somebody in the back, when I was talking to the seniors, said, "We can't hear anything you're saying, Ron." And a bunch of the Gray Panthers in the front said, "We can hear it all. Would you like to trade places?" So we're glad everybody's here. Committee will come to order. And here's what we're talking about today. A decade ago, the Finance Committee, under the leadership of the late chairman, Orrin Hatch, and I decided it was time to take some bold action with respect to helping families where there were challenges, might be alcohol or drugs or one thing or another. And there were only two choices back then. You could keep a kid in a bad situation at home with the parents juggling varieties, these kinds of problems that I mentioned, or you could send them off to a foster care facility, some of which were good, some of them weren't so good. And Chairman Hatch, to his great credit, said to me as we were talking about it, we're going to come up with a third path. We're going to call it Families First. And we're going to say we're going to give the families the tools that they need so that everybody can get on their feet. And so here we are, 6 years removed from passing that legislation, and this is a special priority of mine, and that's what we're doing today. We're going to examine how the law is being used to improve the system so that we can have good choices, healthy choices for kids and families. Now, Family First, our law, bipartisan, effort, centered around three priorities: prevention, strengthening kinship care. And I just want to say thank you to all the grandparents in the House. Ms. Tapazota is going to speak for them today, and you're really going to hear a powerful and passionate advocate for kinship care. But we got a lot of other folks in the House. We want to thank them all for coming. I think they're residing in Plaza West, which is nearby. Hey, there we are. They're in the House waving. All right. Probably violates some rule you can't wave or anything, but I thought it was... God bless. God bless. We're glad you're here. And I'm coming to Plaza West here when we get back, bringing some pastries and some coffee. And what these grandparents are doing is something called kinship care. And back when I was director of the senior citizens, the Gray Panthers, all the church folks would always come to me. And I'd sometimes come by after services or something, we'd talk and say, "What do you think we ought to be working on?" And they'd all say something called kinship care. And so we began back in the days when Bill Clinton was president. And of course, he could talk the birds out of the trees. And I told him, we need to go with this, Mr. President. And that's why grandparents, aunts, uncles are all stepping in all over this country to care for kids, make sure they get the help they need for a supportive and loving home. And so we'll hear from kinship grandma Lori Tapazota of Rhode Island. Senator Whitehouse will introduce her in a few minutes. She's going to share her firsthand experience being a caregiver and after Family First, and how the law has particularly improved her ability to care for her grandson after he was placed in care back in 2015. And Family First funding allowed Lori to give back to her community by creating new supports for these families, kinship families, building the Kinship Advisory Council, so we could make it a big deal to use these grandparents. That was what was so mystifying to me back when I started talking to President Clinton about it. I said, what an obvious treasure right in front of us. And I'm seeing my colleagues here who've been great advocates for care and human services, and we all started talking here in the Finance Committee. And nobody said anything about Democrats and Republicans, not a word. But everybody said, what can we do for these families? So let's talk about these kind of three pieces. We're talking about kinship care now for prevention. Sometimes you need to prevent the need for a foster care placement. Mom and dad are just really saying, hey, we just need a little help. Parent might need a bit of mental health care, substance use disorder treatment, parenting support. Maybe the family just needs to have somebody to kind of talk things through. And with Family First, we created new federal funding for these services. The committee is going to hear from David Reed from the Indiana Department of Child Services, who's going to talk about how his state is working on those kinds of things. Now, the vast majority of states, like my home state of Oregon and Indiana, have basically been working on ways to get through a more streamlined system, these Family First prevention dollars. We still have some work to do. And Ms. Gaston is here. We kind of claim her for Oregon. She's doing really good work to kind of cut through the red tape and get this off the ground. And we really appreciate her approach because she's got a great heart, but she's also got a lot of common sense. And that's the way to go. Now, apropos of the factors at work, we're still not getting full benefit of the approach for Families First at home. The federal government last year spent $182 million on prevention services and spent $4 billion on traditional foster care placements. So we can do better than that. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about prevention, talk about kinship care, talking about getting the resources out more quickly. And finally, Family First work to prevent an end to the policy of warehousing vulnerable kids in these big buildings that really resembled prisons. And often the kids were more traumatized than they were when they entered. And there's no question that foster youth struggling with mental health need a better support system. That's why we have Family First. But I want everybody to know that on my watch, if they think we're going to turn back the clock in America and go back to the days when we were warehousing these kids in these big buildings that produced all of these horror stories, I want anybody who's thinking about doing that to know they're going to have to run over me to do it, because I think that'd be a huge mistake. All right. I probably can't let people clap either. I don't know what all the rules are, but
we can waive that.
Senator Crapo, to his credit, just said for the seniors, we can waive the rule. Okay, thank you, Senator Crapo. Senator Crapo, welcome.